'Cause all my life I've been waiting for, I've been praying for the people to say that we don't wanna fight no more. There'll be no more war, and our children will play. One day, one day, one day.
Recording was made possible by organizations working together for people, not profit.
World is moving to the song I hear. Who's that singing with this machine in my ear? My got some memories. I'm a star, stepping in, fella need a fellas running up in the dream.
This is especially for poor students of any color, working class students of any color, any students who have in some sense been marginalized, and your quest for education has met impediments.
We were in the band and the kids were driving. Myself in the Highlands at age 13, asking questions to the present day me. But backward down the hill, see we were coasting.
Now there might be some students, for example, who have had very few impediments. That's fine. They're human beings like anybody else. But for students whose burning and yearning to be educated is enacted under these conditions, that ought to say something to us.
Moonlight illuminate my life.
And all this life and love and strife and failure is at the twilight of nightfall or the flush of some faint dawning day.
I lay sunray, make the people say, this is something missing, so to screaming out loud. Keep my feet on the ground, head in the clouds. I'm the arrow, you're my bow. Shoot me forward, I will go, I go. But when I go, get the pen gon' make it. If it is for real, tell me what you know.
Ought to say much to us in regard to the kinds of access to education we have here at Dartmouth. Are we taking advantage of it? It's good to see my dear sister Faith here, though. Absolutely.
I don't mean to glorify it, the apple of the tree, trying to lie in the garden hollering. That's when I started to sing. I said, if that brings life unto a certain thing, class is not for me. Sunset in arts and breeze, sound is moving like a chorus. Keep hearing that melody. I check the radio, nothing playing. Check the radio again, nothing playing. Moonlight illuminate my night. By day, sun rain make the people say, this is something missing, so to screaming out loud. Keep my feet on the ground, head in the clouds.
She's in some ways a metaphor of black culture. She's in some ways a symbol of what happens when progress, capital P, moves forward in its technological sense in a variety of so-called enlightenment conceptions that are casting light in certain corners but unable to cast light in other corners.
I'm the arrow, you're my bow. Shoot me forward, I will go, I go. But when I go, get the pen, go, man, and see this story, you tell me what you know.
There are forms of progress that can undermine family structures of feeling. There's forms of progress that can undermine structures of meaning. There's forms of progress that can produce nihilism in your soul, even though you got a smartphone in your pocket. How do you create moments of interruption that can be sustained? So what is at stake is an imperial meltdown, the spiritual blackout. And what is a spiritual blackout? It is the relative eclipse of empathy, courage, integrity, honesty, decency, so that to be a gangster becomes the dominant way of life. I'm going to do anything to get over. I'm going to do anything to be successful. I'm going to do anything to get money. If money, power, fame becomes the fundamental pillars upon which too many young folk are socialized, because that's what they see in the imperial meltdown that we're experiencing. It's just a matter of trying to be honest, trying to be truthful, trying to be frank. That's what it's all about.
Essentially, we're just trying to make music. I'm not going to lie to you, right? I mean, I wake up in the morning, I'm not thinking save the Middle East. I'm thinking figure out a way to make music and get bread. But it's part of it. It's a big part of it, and I think it's a big part of the drive as well. Is that it's inescapable to have to confront these things as a Middle Easterner trying to make music in the world at this moment in time. You're just constantly confronted with all these stereotypes and oversimplifications of regional politics and regional culture and whatever it is, and you always find yourself in a position where you have to explain things to almost justify your existence.
You
right?
can't help but be political in that sense.
You can't.
Yeah.
It's because it's forced onto you, right? That's a double burden of being an Arab musician in this day and time. Is that you have to constantly explain yourself in ways that I feel European or North American musicians don't always have to do. You're not, no one goes up to most American artists and says, do you represent your culture? Versus with Arab musicians where it's almost like, wait, you don't, so why are we listening to you? Right?
Interesting.
Everyone's listening to the same music, listening to the same artist, and relates to each other in that way, like on a cultural level. I mean, how do you end that? Anyway, I don't know. I mean, music, trying to do shows together where we bring artists together and bring Palestinian.
You've done that?
Absolutely. Yeah, we did. It was the first thing I ever really did in Brooklyn, Prospect Park. The first time my picture was ever like in the paper. It was in the Times on the paper in the art section for a show that we did with Palestinian artists in Prospect Park.
Your live album, Live at Subs, dude, got me pretty much through most of my deployment. So,
Thank you, man. Thank
It's an honor to be able to speak to you, dude. When all the way from, I think whenever you did King Without a Crown, all the way through past doing the beatbox, man, which was phenomenal. I would give anything to hear that again, but be able to hear it live, But past that to that song.
Yeah. Way in the morning. Matisyahu on the beats. Wake that punk ass up.
Some of them are run now, some of them are running, some of them are looking for fun, some of them are looking for a way out of confusion. Some of them don't know where to be, some of them don't know where to go. Some of them are trusting instinct that something's missing from the show. Some done fix society and insides are crying no. Some of them are teachers constant flame for it and a chance to go. Some of them embers still glow, them charcoal, hust and low. Some of them come with the hunger suppressed, not let them feel like them blow, yo.
أنا العانس العاقر بالثلاثة طالع ذي الراجل ولا ذي الحائط تجالي كوي أنا كل شي أنا ولا شي بتقولي من أنت أنا.
Young man, controlling your hands, slam your fist on the table and make your demand. Take a stand, fan a fire, boy, the flame of the youth. You got the freedom to
كتبت القصائد، أنا بنيت المدافع، أنا ممكن إني أكرهك، ما اسمح لغير إنه يحبك، ما أنا جيت روحي للشاطئ، لحالي ده وجع عواصف، مش راسي على بال أمن، أنا في شلال محتاجك.
Young man, power is in your hands. Slam your fist on the table and make your demand. You better make the right move.
So we become not just aware of others' suffering, but we identify with that suffering enough to want to do something about it. The history of the species at its best has to do with those who are willing to risk much, sometimes risking it all, to exemplify the grandest ideals. You have to try to ascend up the stairs to be a higher self, given the self that you are at the moment, and try to rely on that higher self and not that established self.
Young man, control in your hand. Slam your fist on the table and make your demand. Take a stand, ban a fire for the flame of the youth. You got the freedom to choose. Better make the right.
I mean, one of the sadder features of our moment, given all our the joy of reveling in each other's humanity and music and so forth, is that, you know, you got impending ecological catastrophe, escalating nuclear catastrophe, economic catastrophes, grotesque wealth inequality all around the world, spiritual catastrophe in terms of intensifying forms of depression, suicide, wasted lives, lack of self-respect, not believing in oneself and thinking that the only way you can really make it is by imitating the mainstream forms of conformity. And then the political catastrophes of right-wing movements all around the world.
Yeah.
And by right-wing movements, what I mean is the rule of big money, big military, and then scapegoat the most vulnerable and try to convince the most vulnerable that it's their fault that they're in the subordinate positions that they are, rather than giving them a fair chance, you see. And that's the makings of new forms of fascism and so on, you see. And you say to yourself, you know, how do we hold on to some sense of hope? And there is no hope without wrestling with despair. If you're afraid of despair, you never have hope.
Austin, Texas.